Here's a sentence the American president's administration spent weeks insisting nobody would ever have to write. A U.S. Air Force F-15E Strike Eagle, one of the most capable fighter jets in the entire American arsenal, shot down by Iranian forces deep inside Iranian territory. That happened overnight on April 3, 2026, more than a month into the war the United States and Israel had launched against Iran, at a point when American officials, including the Secretary of Defense himself, had been publicly claiming total control of the skies over the country. Within hours, a second American aircraft, an A-10 Thunderbolt, was also hit by Iranian fire, barely limping into Kuwaiti airspace before its pilot had to eject. What followed was one of the largest, most dangerous combat search and rescue operations of the entire war, involving special operations forces from every branch of the American military, a rescue helicopter taking small arms fire from Iranian tribesmen on the ground, and a mission that stretched across 2 full days before both downed airmen were finally recovered. And in direct response, the American president authorized what he personally described as a massive strike on Tehran, one that reportedly killed a significant number of senior Iranian military officials in a single night. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly how Iran managed to bring down 2 American aircraft in a single day, despite weeks of claims that its air defenses had been crippled, what the actual rescue operation looked like on the ground, and how swiftly and severely the United States responded. Stay with me for all of it. Quick note before we dive in. I have spent years studying combat search and rescue operations, air defense degradation assessments, and how modern militaries actually respond in the hours immediately following a major aircraft loss, the kind of granular operational detail that separates a real understanding of an incident like this from a simple headline. That's the lens I'm bringing to you today. Everything in this video is sourced from verified reporting, including CNN, The Guardian, Air and Space Forces magazine, and detailed open-source military tracking of this conflict's confirmed losses. I'll walk you through exactly what's been confirmed by both American and Iranian officials, what remains genuinely unclear even now, and where the two sides' accounts of this incident diverge. No hype, no invented details dressed up as certainty. Let's get into it. To understand why this specific incident mattered so much, you have to understand the broader claim it directly contradicted. The war between the United States, Israel, and Iran began on February 28, 2026, with a coordinated strike campaign that killed Iran's supreme leader in its opening hours and rapidly expanded into a full-scale air, naval, and ground campaign across the entire Gulf region. Throughout the first month of that campaign, American officials, including Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, repeatedly asserted that U.S. and Israeli forces had achieved what amounted to total control of Iranian airspace, framing Iran's air defense network as thoroughly degraded and no longer capable of seriously threatening American aircraft. That claim was not simply rhetorical confidence. It shaped how aggressively American commanders were willing to fly manned aircraft over Iranian territory, rather than relying more heavily on standoff weapons and unmanned systems that don't put American aircrew at direct risk. The first cracks in that narrative had actually already appeared well before April. On March 2nd, just days into the war, a friendly fire incident saw a Kuwaiti F-A-18 Hornet shoot down 3 separate American F-15E Strike Eagles over Kuwait, with all 3 crews ejecting safely, a chaotic reminder of just how crowded and dangerous the airspace over this region had become even without direct Iranian action. On March 12th, a KC-135 aerial refueling tanker crashed in Iraq after colliding with another tanker aircraft, killing all 6 crew members aboard. An accident entirely unrelated to enemy fire, but one more indication of how much strain this air campaign was placing on American air crews flying constant, high-tempo missions across a genuinely hostile theater. Iran itself had also already claimed a symbolic first. An Iranian Air Force fighter, an aging Northrop FF-5, reportedly managed to penetrate the multiple layers of air defense protecting Camp Buehring in Kuwait and conduct a successful bombing run. A claim later confirmed by press investigation, despite how outdated that specific Iranian aircraft actually is compared to the American and Allied jets flying in the same skies. But it was the events of April 3rd and 4th that represented the first confirmed instance of Iranian forces actually shooting down a modern American fighter jet using enemy action, rather than friendly fire or an aging aircraft slipping through gaps in coverage. According to detailed timeline reporting from The Guardian, overnight on Friday of April 3rd, an F-15E Strike Eagle belonging to the 494th Fighter Squadron and the 48th Fighter Wing, a unit based in Europe, was shot down by Iranian forces while flying over Iranian territory, with photographs of the wreckage circulating on social media shortly afterward. Both crew members aboard, the pilot and the weapons systems officer, ejected from the aircraft. Just hours later, a second American aircraft, an A-10 Thunderbolt II, the low-flying, heavily armored ground attack jet nicknamed the Warthog, was also struck by Iranian fire. According to the Washington Post's reporting on the incident, that pilot managed to nurse the damaged aircraft toward friendly airspace, successfully reaching Kuwaiti territory before finally ejecting safely. If you are finding this breakdown useful, the kind of hour-by-hour, sourced accuracy you're not going to get from a headline simply saying American jets were shot down, do one thing right now. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the rescue operation that followed this specific incident is genuinely one of the most dramatic and least understood combat search and rescue missions of this entire war. Now let's walk through exactly what that rescue operation actually looked like, because the scale of the response tells you just how seriously the American military treated the loss of that F-15E crew. The pilot from the downed F-15E Strike Eagle was recovered first, rescued approximately 7 hours after the crash, with the help of American military helicopters sent into Iranian territory specifically to retrieve him. That recovery itself was not a clean, uncontested operation. According to Iranian state media reports, tribesmen on the ground in the area shot at the American helicopters conducting the search and rescue mission, and separate reporting confirmed that the helicopter, which ultimately recovered the pilot, was hit by small arms fire during the operation, wounding some of the crew members on board even as the aircraft managed to land safely afterward, with the injured rescuers receiving medical treatment. That detail alone tells you this was not a routine extraction. It was a genuinely contested rescue, carried out over hostile ground under active fire, deep inside a country the United States was actively at war with. The fate of the second crew member, the F-15E's weapons systems officer, remained unknown for a considerably longer and more tense stretch of time. American officials went notably quiet in the hours immediately following the pilot's rescue, offering no public indication of whether the second airman had ejected safely and gone into hiding, had been killed in the crash, or had potentially been captured by Iranian forces. Iranian authorities, for their part, reportedly urged local civilians to assist in the search for the missing airman and announced a reward for information leading to his capture, according to state media reporting on the incident, a detail that underscores just how high the stakes were for American commanders trying to reach him first. According to Wikipedia's detailed sourced compilation of this specific combat search and rescue operation, what followed was a genuinely massive undertaking, spanning 2 full days from April 3rd through April 5th, and drawing on some of the most elite special operations units in the entire American military. The operation involved the Air Force's own 427th Special Operations Squadron and para-rescue men, the Army's 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, more commonly known as Delta Force, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the elite helicopter unit that specializes in exactly this kind of high-risk infiltration and extraction, the Navy's own development group, commonly referred to by its earlier name SEAL Team 6, and support from the Central Intelligence Agency. That is, by any honest measure, one of the most concentrated deployments of elite American special operations capability in a single rescue mission that this entire war has produced. Hundreds of troops and dozens of aircraft, all mobilized to recover 2 American aircrew from deep inside hostile territory. The mission was not without further cost. According to the same compiled reporting, the operation resulted in additional American losses along the way, including 2 MC-130J Hercules transport aircraft and 4 MH-6 or AH-6 special operations helicopters that were reportedly self-destroyed, a standard procedure used to prevent sensitive American aircraft and equipment from falling into enemy hands if they become disabled or have to be abandoned during a high-risk mission deep inside hostile territory. On the Iranian side, the same sourcing documents 3 IRGC members and 4 Iranian army officers killed during the course of the rescue operation. A reminder that this recovery mission itself involved real, direct combat between American Special Operations Forces and Iranian military personnel on the ground, not simply a quiet extraction. Ultimately, according to the operation's documented outcome, both crew members from the downed F-15E were successfully rescued, the pilot within hours, and the weapons systems officer, described in some reporting as seriously injured, recovered several days later following what multiple outlets described as a dramatic special operations raid conducted deep inside Iranian territory, specifically to reach him. If this level of operational detail is useful to you, the kind that shows you exactly which units were involved and what it actually took to bring these airmen home, that is exactly the kind of granular military reporting I intend to keep providing on this channel as this war continues to develop. Because the scale of an operation like this rarely comes through in a simple headline about a downed jet. It's worth comparing the scale of this specific rescue operation to the handful of other combat search and rescue missions in recent American military history that reached a similar level of intensity, because it helps put just how extraordinary this April 2026 operation actually was into proper context. The 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, later documented in the book and film Black Hawk Down, involved a similarly desperate effort to recover downed American helicopter crews from hostile territory. an operation that stretched into an overnight firefight and ultimately cost 18 American lives despite the scale of the rescue effort mounted. During the 1991 Gulf War, Navy pilot Scott O'Grady's shoot-down over Bosnia years later in 1995 triggered a rescue operation involving Marine helicopters escorted by fighter jets, a mission that succeeded in recovering him within 6 days, despite him spending that entire time evading capture on the ground. What sets the April 2026 operation apart from even those historical precedents is the sheer concentration of top-tier special operations units deployed simultaneously, rather than sequentially, for a single mission: Delta Force, DEVGRU, and the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment operating together rather than one service branch, handling the recovery largely on its own the way earlier rescue operations were often structured. That concentration of force reflects a broader shift in how the American military has organized its most sensitive rescue capabilities since the era of Mogadishu in Bosnia, consolidating previously more siloed special operations units under the Joint Special Operations Command specifically, so that exactly this kind of multi-service, rapid response rescue operation can be assembled and launched within hours rather than days. The trade-off, as this specific operation demonstrated, is that even with that improved organizational speed, operating that concentrated a force deep inside genuinely hostile, contested territory still carries real risk, reflected here in the self-destroyed MC-130J transports and MH-6 helicopters, and in the wounded crew members aboard the helicopter that came under small arms fire during the pilot's initial recovery. Modern rescue capability has gotten faster and more coordinated. It has not gotten meaningfully safer for the personnel actually carrying it out. Now, here's the piece of this story that I think deserves the most attention because it directly connects the loss of these two aircraft to how the United States actually responded, and the scale of that response was significant. While the search and rescue operation for the missing weapons systems officer was still actively underway, the American president publicly confirmed that a major American and Israeli strike had hit Tehran overnight, specifically targeting the Iranian capital's military leadership. CNN's live coverage from that period documented visible damage to Shahid Beheshti University in Tehran's Felanjak district following a joint U.S. and Israeli strike carried out on April 4th. And the American president himself stated that many senior Iranian military leaders had died in what he personally described as a massive strike, posting video footage online showing the resulting explosions. Iranian military officials responded to that same round of strikes with their own escalating rhetoric, warning that the United States and Israel would face what they described as the punishment of hell if the conflict continued to expand further, language that directly echoed a similar threat the American president himself had made earlier that same day. That sequence, an American aircraft shot down, contested rescue operation under fire, and within the same news cycle, a major retaliatory strike on Tehran specifically targeting military leadership, represents exactly the kind of escalatory spiral that had been shaping this entire war since its opening days. It's worth being precise here about what's actually confirmed versus what remains somewhat less certain. The American president's own description of the strike as massive and his claim that many military leaders died in it are his own public characterization. And while CNN's reporting confirms the strike itself occurred and documented visible damage at the university site, the precise casualty figures among Iranian military leadership from that specific strike were not independently verified with the same level of detail as, say, the documented outcome of the rescue operation itself. That distinction matters, because it's an important reminder that even in a war, this heavily covered official characterizations of a given strike's success and independently verified outcomes don't always arrive on exactly the same timeline. There's also a broader pattern worth understanding here because this April 3rd and 4th episode was not an isolated incident in this war's overall trajectory. According to Air and Space Forces magazine's own reporting, this was not even the last time a downed American aircraft would trigger a significant retaliatory response. Months later, in June, an American Apache helicopter was shot down by Iranian forces, described in that reporting as the first American crewed aircraft lost to Iran since the April 3rd F-15E incident. And the United States again responded with a fresh round of strikes on Iranian targets, specifically in retaliation for that loss. That repeated pattern, Iran managing to bring down an American aircraft roughly every couple of months, despite persistent American claims of air superiority, followed each time by a significant American retaliatory strike, tells you something important about the actual state of this air war that the more triumphant early claims about total air control never quite captured. There's a broader, uncomfortable truth about this war's overall air loss pattern that deserves its own honest examination, separate from the specific question of Iran's air defense capability, because it complicates any simple narrative about who is actually responsible for American aircraft losses in this conflict. Open source military trackers monitoring confirmed losses throughout the 2026 Iran war have documented a pattern where a significant share of American and Allied aircraft losses came not from enemy action at all, but from friendly fire and accidents. The March 2nd incident, where a Kuwaiti FA-18 shot down 3 American F-15E Strike Eagles, is a stark example. An ally's own air defense system engaging American aircraft in the chaos and confusion of a crowded, high-tempo combat airspace shared by multiple nations' air forces simultaneously. The March 12th KC-135 tanker collision that killed all 6 crew members aboard is another, a pure accident with no enemy involvement whatsoever, but no less costly in terms of American lives lost. When you add up incidents like these alongside confirmed enemy shootdowns like the April 3rd F-15E and A-10 losses, a fuller picture emerges, one where the sheer scale, density, and tempo of this air campaign, dozens of Allied air forces all operating simultaneously across an unusually compressed and contested piece of airspace, has itself become one of the most significant sources of risk to American and Allied aircrew, sometimes independent of anything Iran's own air defenses are actually capable of doing. That distinction matters for understanding this war honestly, rather than through the lens of either side's most favorable talking points. Iran's ability to shoot down a modern F-15E on April 3rd is a genuine, meaningful data point about the limits of the total air superiority claims made earlier in the war. But it exists alongside an equally real pattern of friendly fire and operational accidents that have cost just as many, if not more, American aircraft and lives over the course of this conflict, a reminder that modern warfare at this scale and tempo carries serious risk that has very little to do with how degraded or intact any single adversary's air defense network happens to be. Let me pull back now and give you the honest strategic assessment of what this specific incident, and the broader pattern it belongs to, actually reveals about how this air campaign has really unfolded. The claim that American and Israeli forces had achieved total control of the skies over Iran was never simply a throwaway line. It was a foundational assumption shaping how aggressively American commanders were willing to fly manned combat aircraft over hostile Iranian territory, rather than relying more heavily on standoff weapons, cruise missiles, and unmanned drones that don't put American aircrew directly at risk. The Guardian's own reporting on this incident put the actual implication plainly that these losses put the United States on notice that Iranian air defenses may not have been as thoroughly degraded as the American president's administration had broadly claimed throughout the war's first month. That is a genuinely significant strategic finding, independent of how the specific rescue operation or retaliatory strike played out afterward, because it suggests American commanders may have been operating with a meaningfully more optimistic picture of Iran's remaining air defense capability than the reality on the ground actually supported. At the same time, it's worth being honest about what this incident does not prove. One confirmed enemy shootdown, even a significant one involving a modern F-15E, is not the same thing as evidence that Iran had somehow restored broad, layered air defense coverage capable of seriously contesting the skies over its own territory in a sustained way. The broader documented pattern across this war, more than 60 confirmed aircraft losses tracked across all sides by open-source military monitors, the overwhelming majority to friendly fire, accidents, and Iranian ground fire against low-flying aircraft like the A-10, rather than sophisticated integrated air defense engagements, suggests Iran's remaining capability was real and dangerous, particularly at lower altitudes and closer ranges, but not the kind of comprehensive, high-altitude denial capability that would fundamentally change the broader strategic picture of the war. The honest reading sits between those two extremes. Iran's air defenses were genuinely more dangerous and more resilient than the most confident American public statements suggested, without representing anything close to a full reversal of the broader air campaign's trajectory. There's also a political dimension to how this incident was handled publicly that's worth examining closely, because the gap between the initial silence and the eventual disclosure tells you something about how the administration was managing the story in real time. In the immediate aftermath of the shootdown, American officials went notably quiet about the fate of the missing weapons systems officer, offering no public confirmation of his status for a tense, extended period while the rescue operation was still actively underway. That silence is standard operational security practice, avoiding public confirmation of a missing service member's status while an active recovery mission is in progress, specifically to avoid giving the adversary any additional information that could complicate the rescue. But it also meant that, for a stretch of days, the American public and international media were left without clear information at exactly the moment public attention on this specific incident was at its highest, a dynamic that tends to fill the information vacuum with exactly the kind of speculation and rumor that made outlets like The Guardian's careful, sourced timeline reporting so valuable once more complete information finally became available. The American president's own public framing of the retaliatory strike on Tehran, describing it personally as massive and claiming a significant number of senior Iranian military leaders had died in it, also deserves to be read in that same political context. A president publicly claiming a decisive, high-casualty retaliatory strike in direct response to the loss of American aircrew serves an obvious deterrent and morale purpose, reassuring the public and signaling resolve to Iran, regardless of whether every detail of that public characterization is independently verified with the same rigor as, say, the confirmed outcome of the rescue operation itself. That's not a criticism unique to this administration or this specific incident. It reflects a pattern common to how wartime governments across history have generally described their own retaliatory actions, understandably emphasizing scale and decisiveness in public statements, even when the fully verified, granular details of a given strike's actual results take considerably longer to establish with confidence. And here's why the rescue operation itself deserves just as much attention as the shoot-down that triggered it, because it demonstrates something important about how seriously the American military treats the recovery of its own personnel, almost regardless of the resources required or the risk involved. Deploying Delta Force, DEVGRU, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and Air Force pararescue units alongside CIA support for a single rescue mission, represents an extraordinary concentration of the most elite, most carefully husbanded special operations capability the United States possesses. That is not a decision made lightly or reflexively. It reflects a deeply held institutional commitment, reinforced across decades of American military doctrine, that no service member gets left behind if there is any conceivable way to bring them home. A commitment that held firm here, even though it meant risking additional aircraft and additional American lives to retrieve 2 aircrew from deep inside hostile, active war zone territory. And here is why all of this should matter to you, wherever you're watching this from, even if you've never followed the technical details of an air campaign before today. Every time a modern fighter jet gets shot down in an active war, it forces a recalibration among military planners, among the public, and among the adversary itself about how contested that specific airspace actually is. This incident forced exactly that kind of recalibration in April, and the subsequent Apache shoot-down in June suggests that recalibration was, if anything, an early signal of an ongoing pattern rather than an isolated anomaly. There's also a human dimension to this story that's easy to lose underneath the operational and strategic analysis, and it's worth pausing on directly. Every family of every aircrew member flying missions over this theater has been living with the reality that this specific incident made unmistakably concrete. That despite official assurances about degraded enemy air defenses, the risk of a loved one being shot down, requiring exactly this kind of high-risk, multi-day rescue operation under fire, was never fully eliminated at any point in this war. That reality shapes morale and readiness in ways that don't always show up in official strike assessments or casualty statistics, but that matter enormously to the men and women actually flying these missions, and to the elite rescue units who know that if the worst happens, they may be the ones deployed deep into hostile territory to bring their fellow service members home, whatever the risk to themselves in doing so. For the air crews still flying missions over this exact same airspace as this war continues, and for the American military's broader assumptions about how safely it can continue operating manned aircraft over Iranian territory, that pattern matters enormously, and it's one of the clearest, most concrete pieces of evidence available for just how genuinely contested this war has remained, month after month, despite the more confident early claims about who actually controls the skies. Before you go, 2 things. First, if this breakdown gave you the detailed, sourced picture of exactly what happened during this shoot-down and rescue operation, rather than a simplified headline about American jets being downed, share it with one person trying to understand how contested this air campaign has really been. That's the only way careful operational reporting like this reaches more people than the noise does. Second, I want your read in the comments. Do you think this incident and the pattern of losses that followed it in the months afterward reveals a genuine gap between America's public confidence about air superiority and the actual reality on the ground? Or do you think a small number of confirmed losses, however dramatic, is simply the unavoidable cost of any sustained air campaign of this scale, without necessarily undermining the broader picture of American air dominance? Drop your assessment below. I read every one of them. Here is where things stand. On April 3rd, 2026, Iranian forces shot down a U.S. Air Force F-15E Strike Eagle over Iranian territory, and hours later struck an A-10 Thunderbolt that barely made it into Kuwaiti airspace before its pilot ejected. The first confirmed instances of Iranian forces bringing down modern American combat aircraft through direct enemy action. More than a month into a war, American officials had repeatedly described as having achieved total control of Iranian skies. What followed was a genuinely massive 2-day combat search and rescue operation involving Delta Force, the Navy's DEVGRU, the Air Force's 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, pararescue units, and CIA support. A mission conducted under active fire from Iranian tribesmen and IRGC forces on the ground that ultimately recovered both downed aircrew, the pilot within 7 hours, and the weapons systems officer, seriously injured several days later following a dramatic special operations raid deep inside Iranian territory. In direct response, the American president confirmed a major joint U.S.-Israeli strike on Tehran that same period, one he personally described as massive and said had killed a significant number of senior Iranian military leaders. That same pattern, a downed American aircraft followed by a serious American retaliatory strike, repeated again in June with the loss of an Apache helicopter, suggesting this April incident was an early signal of a genuinely ongoing dynamic rather than an isolated one-time event. Whether that pattern reflects a meaningful, persistent gap in how contested this air campaign has really been, despite the more confident official statements about American and Israeli air superiority, is a question this war's continuing trajectory will keep answering in real time. I'll keep tracking every part of it closely, and I'll bring you the next update in the moment there's something real to report.